What if the first message humanity ever received from another world wasn't a greeting, but a death sentence? At 3:47 in the morning, in a quiet observatory perched on a hill outside Pune, radio astronomer Dr. Priya Iyer was about to find out, and by the time she understood what she was looking at, it would already be too late to unhear it. She almost didn't notice it. Most nights at the Kavali Radio Observatory were routine. Background noise, cosmic static, the occasional pulsar chirping like a distant heartbeat. But that night, the array's secondary receiver locked onto something that made no sense. A signal, tightly structured, repeating in precise intervals, arriving from a point in the sky where no known object should be transmitting anything at all. Priya sat up straight, her coffee going cold beside her keyboard. The pattern wasn't random. It had rhythm. It had intent. Every scientist dreams, at some point, of being the one who finds proof that we are not alone. She assumed, at first, that this might be her moment of triumph. A hello from the stars, a message humanity could be proud to receive. She was wrong, and that was the first turning point of the night. The switch from wonder to unease. The deeper she dug into the data, the less it looked like a greeting and the more it looked like a report, clipped procedural, repeating certain sequences the way military communications repeat coordinates and confirmations. Priya called in her closest colleague, a stubborn and brilliant signals engineer named Daniel Osei, and together they began the slow, grinding work of decoding. 6 days passed. 6 days without proper sleep, 6 days of coffee, chalkboards, and mounting dread. Governments were not yet informed. The world outside still spun in blissful ignorance, unaware that two exhausted scientists in a small lab were slowly prying open a message that was never meant for human eyes. On the 6th day, the code broke. The second turning point arrived in the cruelest way possible, not with celebration, but with silence. Priya stared at the translated text on her screen for nearly a full minute without speaking. The signal was not a greeting. It was a status report transmitted from somewhere impossibly far away, confirming a planet, Earth, as approved for resource extraction. Humanity was not described as a civilization. It was described as an obstacle, a biological infestation currently occupying a world of significant value, one that would need to be cleared before harvesting could begin. Daniel read it over her shoulder, and neither of them said a word for a long time. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't a hoax. The signal had been embedded with data too complex, too consistent, too deeply layered in real astrophysical detail for it to be anything but genuine. Whoever, whatever, sent this message had been watching Earth. Not for years, not for decades, for over 200 years. That was the third and most devastating turning point of Part 1. The realization that this wasn't a warning of something coming. It was confirmation of something that had already been happening silently in the shadows of human history, since long before either of them was born. While humanity built empires, fought wars, invented flight, and reached the stars with hope in its heart, something else had been quietly cataloging every resource, every weakness, every possibility, deciding, patiently and coldly, that the time to act was near. Priya's hands trembled as she reached the phone. There was only one number she could think to call, a contact at the Indian Space Research Organization who had connections that reached far beyond her small observatory. She hesitated for only a moment before dialing. Whatever came next, there was no going back now. The message was decoded. The truth was known. And somewhere out in the vast, indifferent dark, an answer was already on its way to Earth, whether humanity was ready for it or not. By dawn, government vehicles were already approaching the observatory gates. What happens when the deepest fear of every human civilization, the fear of not being alone and not being welcome, becomes undeniable fact? Within 72 hours of Priya's discovery, that fear stopped being a question for philosophers and science fiction writers. It became a briefing document on the desks of the most powerful leaders on Earth. The information moved with terrifying speed once the first government confirmed the signal's authenticity. Within a week, 12 nations had independently verified the transmission using their own arrays, cross-referencing frequencies, structures, and embedded technical data far beyond current human capability. There was no room left for denial. The signal was real. The threat was real. And the countdown, once decoded fully, revealed something that turned quiet dread into full-blown global panic. An alien fleet, vast, organized, and already in transit, was projected to arrive within 4 years. 4 years to prepare for the end of the world, or the beginning of humanity's fight to survive it. This was the first turning point of Part 2, the moment secrecy became impossible. Despite attempts by several governments to contain the information, leaks spread like wildfire across every corner of the internet. Within days, the truth was known not just by presidents and prime ministers, but by factory workers, students, farmers, and children. Panic swept through cities. Stock markets collapsed and reopened in chaos. Religious gatherings swelled. Some people rioted. Others prayed. Many simply stood outside at night, staring up at a sky that no longer felt safe. But something unexpected happened amid the chaos, something that would define the rest of humanity's story. For the first time in recorded history, the divisions that had defined human civilization for millennia began to crack under the weight of a threat too large for any single nation to face alone. Old rivalries did not vanish overnight, but they were forced, for the first time, into the background. An emergency global council was formed within 30 days of disclosure, uniting scientists, military leaders, and engineers from every continent under a single shared mission: survival. This was the second turning point, humanity's fractured world beginning, however imperfectly, to become one. Dr. Priya Iyer, once a quiet academic working late nights in a small observatory, suddenly found herself thrust onto the world stage. She was brought before the newly formed Global Defense Coalition, not as a spectator, but as a person who best understood the alien transmission structure and language. Her small team of 2 had grown, almost overnight, into a division of over 300 linguists, cryptographers, and physicists, all working to unlock the layers of message still not fully translated. It was during this frantic period of expansion that the third and most consequential turning point emerged. Buried within the transmission were secondary data threads previously dismissed as background noise or transmission errors. Priya's team began to suspect they weren't errors at all. They were something else entirely. Fragments of a second, hidden signal layer beneath the first, using a completely different encoding structure. Someone, somewhere, might be trying to say something the primary transmission wasn't meant to reveal. Whether it was a warning, a trap, or something in between, Priya knew one thing for certain. They weren't just decoding a report anymore. They were about to open a second door, one that could change everything about how humanity understood the threat bearing down on them, and possibly reveal that not everyone in that approaching fleet agreed with its mission. As engineers around the globe broke ground on humanity's first true warships, and world leaders debated strategies never before imagined, Priya returned to her lab with a singular focus. If there really was a second voice hidden inside that signal, she intended to find it, no matter what it cost her. What does it take to prepare an entire species for war in less than 4 years, against an enemy no one has ever seen? The answer, humanity would soon discover, required breaking nearly every rule of science, politics, and human limitation that had ever existed. Within 6 months of global disclosure, construction had begun on structures unlike anything ever built in human history. Orbital shipyards, assembled in low Earth orbit through an unprecedented collaboration of engineers from dozens of nations, began taking shape against the black canvas of space. These weren't satellites or space stations. They were the skeletal frames of warships, designed not for exploration, but for defense of an entire planet. This was the first turning point of Part 3, the moment humanity stopped preparing quietly and started building openly, at a scale never before attempted. Entire economies pivoted overnight. Car factories became weapons foundries. Universities suspended standard curricula to focus almost exclusively on propulsion physics, materials science, and military engineering. Young people who once dreamed of ordinary careers found themselves training as fighter pilots for machines that didn't yet exist, or as engineers tasked with solving problems no textbook had ever addressed. Progress, however, was agonizingly slow at first. Conventional rocket propulsion was far too weak to maneuver combat vessels at the speeds needed to survive an engagement with an advanced alien fleet. For the first year, morale wavered as scientists hit wall after wall, and public confidence began to erode under the crushing weight of an impossible deadline. Then came the second turning point, a breakthrough that changed the entire trajectory of humanity's defense effort. A team of physicists working out of a research facility in Geneva, building on decades of theoretical work in exotic energy fields, achieved a stable test of a radically new propulsion concept. It wasn't faster than light travel, not in the way fiction imagined it, but was far beyond anything conventional rocketry could achieve, a breakthrough later dubbed compression thrust, allowing ships to accelerate at rates that should have been physically impossible for anything built with known materials. The discovery spread through the global engineering community like electricity. Within weeks, shipyards that had been struggling to meet impossible deadlines suddenly found new life. Designs were reworked. Timelines, once considered hopelessly optimistic, became achievable. For the first time since the crisis began, engineers allowed themselves to believe humanity might actually stand a fighting chance. But breakthroughs in technology were not the only thing being tested. As international cooperation deepened, so did old tensions bubbling just beneath the surface. Some nations grew suspicious that others were hoarding technological advantages. Military leaders argued over command structures. There were entire weeks where the newly formed global defense coalition seemed on the verge of fracturing under the weight of pride, fear, and mistrust. It was in the middle of this internal struggle that the third turning point of Part 3 arrived. Quiet, but massive in consequence. Dr. Priya Iyer's team, still working tirelessly to unravel the second hidden signal buried within the original transmission, finally cracked a portion of its structure. What they found stopped the room cold. It wasn't random data. It was a message, deliberately embedded, written by someone with intimate knowledge of the invading fleet's operations. The message was fragmented, difficult to fully translate, but unmistakably clear on one point. Not every member of the approaching force agreed with its mission. Someone inside the enemy fleet, someone with access to sensitive operational data, appeared to be trying to make contact. For the first time since the crisis began, humanity wasn't just building weapons in the dark. It might have an ally hidden within the very fleet that intended to destroy it. Can trust ever exist between a species fighting for survival and a stranger from a very fleet sent to destroy them? That question would come to define the next chapter of humanity's fight. And it began with a single, fragile line of contact that Dr. Priya Iyer almost dismissed as a glitch. After weeks of painstaking analysis, Priya's team successfully stabilized a two-way communication channel using the same layered encoding structure hidden within the original transmission. The first response was faint, delayed by the immense distance still separating the alien fleet from Earth, but undeniably real. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't friendly. It was cautious, careful, deliberate, as though the sender understood exactly how dangerous this act of communication truly was for them. This was the first turning point of Part 4, proof of life on the other side of an impossible silence. The being, who would later be referred to only by the designation Source, identified itself as a lower-ranking officer within the invading fleet's intelligence division. Source claimed to disagree, fundamentally, with the mission's objective, not out of sympathy for humanity specifically, but out of opposition to the doctrine that classified developing civilizations as obstacles rather than potential allies. Whether Source's motives were genuinely moral or something more complicated, no one on Earth could be certain. Military leaders were deeply divided on whether to trust the information being offered. Some believed it was a trap, an attempt by the enemy fleet to feed false intelligence and lure humanity into a fatal miscalculation. Others argued that any advantage, however uncertain, was worth the risk given the scale of the threat bearing down on them. Priya, more than anyone, understood the danger of blind trust. But she also understood something else. Humanity was, quite simply, running out of time and options. After intense debate within the Global Defense Coalition, a controversial decision was made to cautiously accept limited intelligence from Source, while treating every piece of information as unverified until proven otherwise. The second turning point arrived when that decision paid off in a way no one expected. Source began providing details about the invading fleet's command structure, weapon systems, and, most critically, a previously unknown vulnerability in their shielding technology, tied to a very specific frequency range their system struggled to fully compensate for. Independent teams of physicists spent months verifying the claim through simulations, refusing to accept it purely on faith. When the vulnerability was confirmed as scientifically plausible, it triggered a complete shift in humanity's defensive strategy. Weapon systems that had been designed around brute force destruction were redesigned to exploit this specific weakness. It wasn't a guarantee of victory, but for a species facing an enemy fleet vastly superior in size and experience, it was the first real strategic advantage humanity had ever had. As trust between Priya's team and Source slowly deepened, so did the emotional weight of their communication. Source revealed in fragmented and cautious messages details about the fleet's internal culture, a rigid hierarchy that viewed emerging civilizations not as equals, but as resources to be measured and exploited. Species deemed uncomplicated, lacking unified resistance or advanced technology, were considered easy conquests. Earth, based on centuries of quiet observation, had been placed firmly in that category. This assumption would prove to be the invaders' greatest weakness. The third turning point of Part 4 came just months before the fleet's projected arrival, when Source sent a final, urgent message. Internal leadership within the fleet had grown suspicious that their communications were being monitored. Contact might not be possible much longer. Whatever advantage humanity could gain from this fragile alliance, it needed to be used soon, because whether or not Source survived what came next, the invading fleet was no longer far away. It was close, and it believed with complete confidence that Earth would fall easily. What happens when an ancient, confident invading force meets a species that is completely underestimated? The galaxy was about to find out, and the answer would begin the moment the alien fleet crossed into the outer edge of the solar system. Detection came first from an array of newly deployed sensor satellites positioned far beyond Mars, designed specifically to give humanity as much warning as possible. When the readings came in, confirming the scale of the approaching force, even the most hardened military commanders in the Global Defense Coalition went silent. The fleet was massive, hundreds of vessels, moving with a chilling, disciplined precision that spoke of centuries of conquest experience. This was the first turning point of Part 5, the moment theoretical preparation collided with undeniable, terrifying reality. For years of shipbuilding, propulsion breakthroughs, military training, and fragile alien alliance had all led to this single moment. There was no more time to prepare. There was only time to fight. Humanity's defense fleet, though far smaller in number, had been built around every advantage gathered over the past 4 years. Compression thrust engines allowing for maneuvers the invaders' own sensors struggled to predict, and weapon systems fine-tuned to exploit the shielding vulnerability revealed by Source. Still, as the two fleets closed the distance across the void, the sheer scale of the alien armada made even the most optimistic among humanity's commanders brace for catastrophic losses. The invading fleet, meanwhile, approached with an almost arrogant confidence. Centuries of observation had convinced their command structure that Earth's inhabitants were unsophisticated, disorganized, and incapable of mounting any meaningful resistance. Their tactical approach reflected that assumption completely, spreading their vessels in a wide, standard formation designed for efficient resource clearing, not for engaging a prepared, coordinated military force. That overconfidence became the second turning point of Part 5, and it would prove costly. As the alien fleet advanced within striking range, human ships executed maneuvers no invading force had ever encountered from a primitive species. Coordinated strikes exploiting blind spots in enemy shield frequencies, evasive patterns powered by propulsion technology far beyond what centuries-old surveillance data had predicted humanity could achieve. Confusion rippled through the invading fleet's command structure almost immediately. Ships that should have effortlessly overwhelmed their targets found themselves taking damage from directions their defensive systems hadn't accounted for. Aboard the flagship of humanity's defense fleet, Priya watched the battle unfold through tactical displays fed by data streams from around the globe, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Losses were real. Ships were destroyed. Lives were lost on both sides of a battle that had once existed only in nightmare scenarios. But for the first time, the invaders were not simply advancing unopposed. They were being forced, ship by ship, formation by formation, to fight for every inch of space they tried to claim. The third and most decisive turning point of Part 5 arrived when the invading fleet's command structure, faced with mounting losses and a level of resistance their doctrine had never prepared them for, made a decision that stunned everyone watching from Earth. They began to retreat. Not a full withdrawal, not a surrender, but a tactical pullback, a reassessment forced by an enemy they had catastrophically misjudged. Cheers erupted in command centers across the globe as sensor data confirmed the alien fleet was disengaging. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. Casualties on both sides were heavy, and everyone in the Global Defense Coalition understood this was almost certainly just the first wave of a much larger conflict. But in that moment, something monumental had happened. Humanity, once dismissed as an obstacle unworthy of true consideration, had done what no one, least of all their attackers, believed possible. It had fought back, and it had made the invaders retreat. What does it truly mean to survive an encounter meant to end you, and to know it isn't over? As the retreating alien fleet withdrew to the outer edge of the solar system to regroup, humanity was left to grapple with a truth both triumphant and terrifying. The first battle had been won, but the war had barely begun. In the days following the retreat, footage and data from the battle spread across every screen on Earth. For a species that had spent 4 years living under the shadow of near-certain extinction, this moment carried a weight beyond simple military victory. It was proof, undeniable, hard-won proof, that humanity's unity, ingenuity, and refusal to surrender had actually mattered. This was the first turning point of Part 6. The emotional reckoning of a species that had stared into the abyss and, for the first time, stared back with confidence instead of despair. Celebrations broke out in cities across the globe, tempered by grief for those lost in the battle and sober awareness of what still lay ahead. Memorials were built even as shipyards continued working around the clock, because everyone understood this single engagement, however historic, was only a delay. Dr. Priya Iyer, exhausted but resolute, resumed contact attempts with Source, desperate to learn what the retreat truly meant for the larger invasion effort. When contact was finally reestablished, the message that came through carried both relief and dread in equal measure. Source confirmed what humanity's military analysts had already feared. The retreating force represented only the vanguard of a much larger invasion effort. Additional fleets, significantly larger and more heavily armed, were already committed to mission and would arrive in the coming years, regardless of what had happened to the first wave. This was the second turning point of Part 6, the sobering realization that survival had only purchased time, not safety. The initial invading force, humiliated by their unexpected defeat, would return to report back to a command structure that no longer viewed Earth as an easy, uncomplicated target. If anything, that failure guaranteed the next assault would be prepared with far greater caution and far greater force. And yet, something profound had shifted in humanity's understanding of itself. The years spent building warships, developing revolutionary propulsion technology, and forging an unlikely alliance across the vast gulf of space had changed the very fabric of global civilization. Old political divisions, while not erased, had been reshaped by the shared experience of facing extinction together. Scientific collaboration reached levels never before achieved in human history. An entire generation had grown up learning that survival required unity, innovation, and courage, lessons that would not be easily forgotten now that the immediate crisis had passed. The third and final turning point of Part 6 arrived in a closing address delivered by the Global Defense Coalition to the people of Earth, broadcast simultaneously in every language spoken on the planet. It was not a message of comfort, nor a false promise that the danger had ended. It was, instead, a declaration of resolve. Humanity had proven, in its first true test against an interstellar threat, that it would not go quietly into extinction. The invaders had underestimated a fractured, unprepared species, and paid the price for that mistake. The galaxy had learned, in one brief but decisive battle, that Earth was no longer simply a resource waiting to be claimed. It had become something the invaders' doctrine had never accounted for, an adversary capable of adapting, uniting, and fighting back with ferocity born from the simple, unbreakable will to survive. Somewhere in the vast darkness beyond the edge of the solar system, larger fleets continued their slow, patient advance toward Earth. The war was far from over. But for the first time since that fateful signal was decoded in a quiet observatory outside Pune, humanity did not face that future with despair. It faced it as a species that had already proven it could win. What do you do when the enemy you already fought was never the real threat? Only a scout sent to test your defenses. 2 years after the first battle, humanity was about to learn that the fleet it had driven back was nothing more than a probing force, and the true invasion had only just begun. Life on Earth had changed in ways no one could have predicted before the first attack. Cities that once thrived on tourism now hummed with shipyards and training academies. Children who had grown up during the crisis knew orbital defense drills the way earlier generations knew fire drills. The Global Defense Coalition, once a fragile experiment in forced cooperation, had become something closer to a true planetary government, imperfect, contested, but functioning. Humanity had used its 2 years of borrowed time well. Then came the first turning point of Part 7, a transmission from Source, delayed and badly damaged, warning that the second wave was no longer simply coming. It had already crossed into the outer edge of known space, moving faster than any previous estimate had predicted. Worse, Source revealed that this fleet was not organized like the first. It was led by a different branch of command entirely, one that had studied the failure of the initial assault in obsessive detail and redesigned its entire strategy around a single goal, making sure Earth's tricks would not work twice. Priya, now a senior architect of Earth's defense strategy rather than a lone scientist decoding signals in the dark, understood immediately what this meant. The shielding vulnerability that had won humanity its first victory had almost certainly been patched. The unpredictable maneuvers that once caught the invaders off guard would be anticipated this time, modeled and countered by an enemy that no longer underestimated its opponent. Whatever advantage secrecy and surprise had given humanity in the first battle was gone. This time, humanity would have to win through strength, wit, and everything it had built in the years since, not through borrowed intelligence and lucky timing. The second turning point arrived when contact with Source went silent for good. His final message, fragmented and urgent, warned that his access had been discovered, that he did not expect to survive what came next. It was a devastating loss, not only of an ally, but of Earth's only true window into the invaders' plans. Humanity was, for the first time since the crisis began, flying blind against an enemy that now knew exactly who it was fighting. Yet in that darkness, something new emerged. Freed from dependence on second-hand intelligence, Priya's team pivoted toward a strategy built entirely on human ingenuity, a layered defense combining the compression thrust fleet with a newly developed network of automated orbital platforms, designed to adapt their tactics in real time rather than rely on a single exploited weakness. It was untested. It was risky, but it was entirely humanity's own. The third turning point of Part 7 came as sensor arrays confirmed the true scale of the approaching force. Easily 3 times the size of the first wave, organized with precision that left even hardened commanders uneasy. The countdown began again, this time with no hidden ally, no guaranteed weakness, and no illusions about how close humanity had come to losing everything the last time. Standing before the Global Defense Coalition on the eve of the second battle, Priya delivered a message to a watching world that echoed the resolve of the years before it. Humanity had not survived the first encounter by luck alone. It had survived because it chose, in its darkest hour, to become something greater than the sum of its divisions. Now it would have to prove that again, this time without a voice from within the enemy's ranks to guide the way.